Hi, I'm Dr. Charles Jirkovsky. I'm a professor of music, and in this video, I'm going to share with you what I think are 10 of the most interesting facts about music in the Old Testament. Now, everything on this list can be found in my new book, Music in the Bible. In this volume, I go through all the musical examples throughout the entire Old Testament, also called the Hebrew Bible or the Tanakh. You can get your copy from Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, many brick and mortar bookstores, or you can listen to the audiobook version. Now, if you've never used Audible to listen to an audiobook before, you're really missing out. You can click the link below to download Music in the Bible for free if you are a first-time Audible customer. It's narrated by the wonderful Chris Larson, and it's available now on Audible. You can also check out the second volume, Music in the Bible, New Testament, which comes out May 5th, 2024. You can find all of those links below. Be sure to watch this video to the end to find out how you can win a free copy of Music in the Bible and Music in the Bible New Testament. Let's get started. Number 1, there are an astounding 547 musical references in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament. These 547 examples include both singing, that is vocal music, but also instrumental music. Now, you might understandably think that all the music in the Bible is worship music, and actually that's not the case. Only 372 of those references are examples of worship. It's about 68.5%. So I said musical instruments. We all know what the musical instruments in the Bible are, right? It's a harp, a lyre, a trumpet. You may have heard of the sackbut, but are these really the instruments that were played by the Israelites? The answer is, of course not. Those are European instruments. In Music in the Bible, I explore the actual instruments played by King David, Miriam, the temple orchestra, and King Nebuchadnezzar's court musicians. And that brings me to my second interesting fact. There are 22 unique musical instruments described in the Hebrew Bible, described in the Old Testament. But of those 22, only 16 of them are Israelite instruments. The additional 6 are Babylonian instruments only described in the book of Daniel in King Nebuchadnezzar's court. For interesting fact number 3, let's look at the most frequently named instrument in the Bible, the shofar. With 72 references in the Hebrew Bible alone, the shofar is the most frequently mentioned instrument in the entire Bible, usually called a ram's horn in English Bibles, but it didn't always come from a ram. This is a ram's horn shofar. You blow in the tip and it sounds like this. But there are many other types of shofars, or to use the plural, shofarot. For example, this shofar comes from an animal called a gemsbok. But the largest one comes from the kudu. Pretty impressive. Interesting fact number 4, the second most commonly mentioned instrument is also the oldest instrument. You may think of it as a harp or a lyre, but King David called it a kinnor. As I mentioned, the kinnor is the oldest instrument described in the Bible, and not only within the biblical narrative itself, in that it's the first instrument that appears in the Bible in Genesis 4:21, it's also mentioned in the book of Job, whose lifetime aligns with that of Abraham. But of all the Israelite musical instruments, the kinnor also shows up first in the historical record. For example, the Megiddo jar discovered in Israel is more than 3,000 years old, but that's nothing compared to the Negev cave etchings. Some scholars say these depictions of people playing a kinnor could have been carved as long as 5,000 years ago. In fact, the kinnor is so old it didn't start out as a kinnor at all. It started out as a bow and arrow. If you pluck the string on a bow, it creates a pitch. If you keep adding string after string, and you keep changing the pitch, then eventually you get a kinnor. Interesting fact number 5. One of the musical instruments that we see the most today in churches and synagogues is the tambourine or the timbrel. And a lot of congregations use the timbrel because they think it has biblical roots, when in actuality, this instrument never existed in ancient Israel. So then what did Miriam and the other women play when they crossed the Red Sea? What was the author of Psalm 150 referring to when he describes playing with timbrel? The answer is a frame drum. It's a thin wooden drum with a head on one side, but it was just a drum. Now there's another instrument called the Persian daf, which looks pretty similar to this one, except for metallic rings on the inside, which does admittedly sound pretty close to a tambourine by ancient standards. But if the Persian daf was played in Israel, it wasn't until the Jews returned from Babylon. Certainly not during an exodus out of Egypt. So it should come as no surprise that there are actually artistic depictions of women playing very similar frame drums, called a tof, or plural, tupim. Interesting fact number 6 is that while they did indeed have cymbals in ancient Israel, they weren't the large cymbals we have today, they were tiny little finger cymbals. Number 7 is that many of these instruments have actually been discovered. We have finger cymbals called metziltaim, small bells called pa'amonim, and many examples of bone flutes that we can still play. This is what the Israelites would have called an ugav. Number 8. While there are many instruments that we don't actually have intact physical examples of, there are artistic depictions of many biblical musical instruments. I already mentioned the Megiddo jar and the Negev cave etchings with the kinnor depictions, but a kinnor also appears on coins from the Bar Kokhba revolt. By this point, it starts to take on a noticeably Greek look, but it's still an Israelite instrument. The kinnor's larger cousin, called a nevel, often translated as harp in English Bibles, and chatzotzerot, which are a pair of silver trumpets, just like the pair described in Numbers chapter 10. We've also found figurines of people playing the minim, or the lute, and don't forget about the figurine of the woman playing the tof. Now, for interesting fact number 9, let's go back to those chatzotzerot, those silver trumpets that come in pairs that are on the Bar Kokhba coins. What if I told you that we actually have an intact pair of these trumpets, and you can even hear them being played by going to musicinthebible.com? Well, they're not exactly Israelite chatzotzerot, but they're about as close as we're going to get. The trumpets I'm referring to are Tutankhamun's trumpets, the trumpets that were buried in the tomb with King Tut, the pharaoh of Egypt. When King Tut died in 1325 BCE, he was buried with one silver trumpet and one bronze trumpet. Now let's say there actually was a historical exodus out of Egypt. Many scholars have posited that Ramses II is a likely candidate for who that pharaoh would have been. If that's true, and Ramses II took the Egyptian throne in 1279 CE, that would mean a historical exodus could be as close to King Tut's life as 46 years. So now let's look at the book of Numbers, chapter 10, verse 2. This is where God commands Moses to make trumpets out of hammered silver. These Israelites lived their entire lives in Egypt, so if they were going to make hammered silver trumpets, they're going to make them in the Egyptian style. Well, in Exodus 3:22, 11:2, and 12:35, the Israelites are commanded to take silver from Egypt as reparation for their enslavement. This means that these trumpets that the Israelites are making out of silver are conceivably even being made from Egyptian silver. Therefore, it stands to reason that these ancient Egyptian trumpets were probably the closest example to the Israelite chatzotzerot trumpets. King Tut's trumpets were actually played in 1939 over the airwaves of the BBC. If you'd like to hear this amazing recording and to get a sense of what these trumpets would have sounded like to Moses, Miriam, and Aaron, visit musicinthebible.com and look under the resources tab. Okay, we finally made it. My 10th interesting fact about music in the Old Testament is that if you have a Hebrew language copy of the Tanakh, of the Hebrew Bible, of the Old Testament, that means that you have a complete set of biblical music notation to accompany every line of scripture in the Old Testament. Yes, I'm going to say that again. If you have a Hebrew language Bible, you have on your shelf a complete set of the biblical music notation that accompanies every single line of scripture from the Old Testament. Now, if I open to a random page, this is Genesis chapter 30, verse 12, we see this Hebrew script here. Now you'll notice that the letters have little dots and lines underneath them, on top of them, sometimes inside them, or to the side of them. Now a lot of these are vowel markers so that we know how to pronounce these words. But on every single word, there is at least one marking that is biblical music notation. These are called te'amim. They were added in about 1,000 years ago, but the group that added them never claimed to have composed the melodies. Tradition says that they go all the way back to the time of Moses. This group, called the Masoretes, were simply the first ones to provide a written record of these melodies. Now, if you don't have a Hebrew language copy of the Hebrew Bible at home, you can visit a website like sefaria.org to see examples of the Te'amim yourself, or pick up a copy of Music in the Bible to learn more in chapter 9. All right, that's it. Those are my 10 interesting facts about music in the Hebrew Bible, music in the Old Testament. Again, Music in the Bible is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Audible. But if you would like to win a free copy of this book, as well as my next book, which comes out May 5th, 2024, Music in the Bible, New Testament, all you have to do is like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below which of my 10 interesting facts was your favorite. That's it for today. I'll see you next time.